Three women vanished from the streets of Cleveland. Different years, different lives, different circumstances, same ending. Police searched, families waited, communities rallied. Media covered the stories. Time passed, and the truth stayed hidden inside a house no one suspected. A house that stood on an ordinary street. A house where neighbors walked past every single day. A house where the monster waved hello. For more than 10 years, justice had the address. It just never knocked hard enough. This is the true story of the Cleveland kidnappings. A story not just about a monster, but about silence, failure, and the moment three women decided they would not die in that house. It's about the calls that were dismissed, the screams that were ignored, the investigations that went nowhere, the mother who died still searching for her daughter, the families who never gave up hope even when everyone else did. And the question that haunts this case to this day: how many chances did we have to save them? How many warnings were ignored? How many times did help arrive at that door and turn away? This is not a story about how the system saved three women. This is a story about how three women saved themselves, and about the decade of failures that forced them to. Chapter 1. A Quiet Street. Seymour Avenue in Cleveland's West Side looked ordinary. The kind of street you'd find in any working-class American neighborhood. Small homes lined with chain-link fences. Modest front yards with grass that needed cutting. Neighbors who waved in passing. Children who played on the sidewalks. A place where nothing ever seemed to happen. Where people knew each other's names but respected each other's privacy. Where doors stayed locked and curtains stayed drawn, and no one thought twice about it. At number 2207 lived a man named Ariel Castro, 52 years old. A school bus driver for Cleveland Metropolitan School District. He'd held that job for more than 20 years, transporting children to and from school every day. Parents trusted him. Kids knew him. He was reliable, punctual, never caused problems. He was also a bass player in local bands. He performed at neighborhood gatherings, at small venues, at backyard parties. People called him friendly, outgoing, talented. He had 3 adult sons from a previous relationship. He had friends in the community. He attended local events. He helped neighbors when they needed it. Someone who smiled at you in the grocery store. Someone who'd offer to help carry your bags. Someone who seemed completely, utterly normal. Nothing about his house raised alarms. The windows were often covered with plastic, cardboard, or curtains. The doors stayed locked during the day. The backyard was fenced and private. But in a neighborhood where privacy was respected, where people minded their own business, that didn't seem strange. If anything, it seemed prudent. This was Cleveland. People kept to themselves, and that was the danger. Because behind that door, behind those covered windows, behind that locked fence, 3 women were living in a nightmare that would last over a decade. 3 women who had been stolen from these same streets. 3 women whose faces appeared on missing posters throughout the city. 3 women whose families never stopped searching. They were there the whole time, breathing the same air, living in the same neighborhood, blocks from their families, and no one knew. If you're finding this story compelling, please hit the subscribe button for more true crime content like this. Your support helps us continue telling these important stories. Chapter 2. Michelle Knight, August 23, 2002. Michelle Knight was 21 years old. She had lived a difficult life, in and out of foster care as a child, struggling with the aftermath of abuse, trying to survive on her own in a world that hadn't been kind to her. But she had something worth fighting for. She had a 2-year-old son named Joey. He'd been removed from her care due to her unstable living situation. She was fighting desperately to regain custody. She had a court appearance scheduled for that day, August 23rd, 2002, regarding her child. That appointment was everything to her. It was her chance to prove she could be a good mother. It was her chance to get her son back. She couldn't miss it. That morning, she was at a family dollar store on Lorraine Avenue, not far from the courthouse. She was trying to figure out how to get to her appointment. She didn't have a car. Public transportation was unreliable. She was running out of time. That's when she ran into someone she knew from the neighborhood. Ariel Castro, the father of one of her friends. Someone she'd met before. Someone she had no reason to fear. He recognized her. He seemed kind, concerned. He asked where she was headed. She told him about the court appointment, about her son, about how important this was. He offered her a ride. But then he mentioned something else. He said he had a puppy at home that his daughter might like to give away. He knew Michelle liked animals. He thought maybe she'd want to see it. It would only take a minute. Michelle hesitated. But Castro was persuasive. He seemed trustworthy. He was a father himself. He was someone from the neighborhood. What harm could it do? She accepted the ride. She got into his car. She never made it to court that day. When she didn't show up, the legal system moved on without her. The judge issued a ruling in her absence. Social services assumed she'd abandoned her case, that she'd given up on her son. Her family, already fractured and complicated, assumed she'd left on her own. Michelle had been in and out of foster care. She'd had a tumultuous relationship with her mother. She'd disappeared for short periods before. So when she didn't come home, when days turned into weeks, some people assumed she'd just left, run away, started over somewhere else. The missing persons report was filed, but it didn't generate urgency. It didn't trigger a massive search. Michelle was an adult. She had a history. She fit a profile that law enforcement often dismisses: vulnerable, transient, troubled. In the calculus of missing persons cases, she was low priority, and that assumption would be catastrophic because Michelle hadn't left. She was inside 2207 Seymour Avenue, chained to a pole in a dark basement, beaten until she could barely move, starved for days at a time, repeatedly raped. She screamed until her voice broke. She fought until she was too weak to resist. She begged for mercy. She prayed for death when mercy didn't come. Castro told her no one was looking for her. He told her that her family didn't care. He told her that she would die in that house if she didn't obey. And for a while, Michelle had no evidence to contradict him. But she refused to give up. Even in those early days, when the horror was fresh and the hope seemed impossible, she held on. At one point, months into her captivity, neighbors heard disturbing sounds coming from the house. Banging, screaming. Something that didn't sound right. They called the police. Officers arrived at Castro's house. They knocked on the door. Castro answered. He was calm, cooperative. He smiled. He explained the noise. Maybe it was the television. Maybe it was him working on something in the basement. Nothing to worry about, officer. Michelle was inside the house during that visit. She was in the basement, chained, terrified. She could hear voices. She could hear Castro talking to the police. She tried to scream, but her voice was weak. The basement was far from the front door, and Castro had prepared for this possibility. The officers didn't search the home. They didn't push past Castro's polite explanations. They didn't ask to come inside. They accepted his story. They left, and Michelle stayed trapped. That moment would cost her 11 years of her life. 11 years of torture, isolation, and suffering. Because the system trusted a predator's word. Because the police didn't push hard enough. Because Michelle Knight, in their eyes, wasn't important enough to save. Chapter 3. Amanda Berry, April 21st, 2003. Amanda Berry was 16 years old. It was April 21st, 2003. The day before her 17th birthday. The day before her mother's birthday, too. She was a junior at John Marshall High School in Cleveland. She was a good student, well-liked with dreams of her future. She had plans to celebrate both birthdays the next day. That evening, she was working her shift at a Burger King on Lorraine Avenue. It was a normal shift. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would suggest what was about to happen. When her shift ended around 7:30 p.m., she called her sister from the restaurant payphone. She said she'd gotten a ride home and would be there soon. That was the last time anyone in her family heard from her. Amanda never arrived home. Her mother, Luana Miller, immediately knew something was wrong. Amanda wasn't the type to run away. She wasn't rebellious. She didn't have problems at home. She was responsible, dependable. This wasn't like her. Luana called everyone Amanda knew. She called friends, classmates, relatives. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. Luana called the police that same night. She filed a missing persons report immediately. And unlike Michelle Knight's case, Amanda's disappearance received significant media attention right away. Her age helped. Her circumstances helped. She was a teenager who vanished on her way home from work. She had a stable family fighting for her. Her mother refused to be silent. Luana organized searches. She printed thousands of flyers. She appeared on local news stations begging for information. She contacted the FBI. She reached out to America's Most Wanted. She called psychics, hoping for any lead, any clue, anything that might bring her daughter home. She offered a reward. She held vigils. She kept Amanda's case in the public eye. Amanda's face was everywhere in Cleveland, on posters, on news broadcasts, in newspapers. Everyone knew her name. Everyone knew her story. And still, she was only blocks away from home, inside the same house where Michelle Knight had already been held for 8 months. Amanda was taken to 2207 Seymour Avenue. She was kept in a separate room from Michelle. She didn't know Michelle was there. Michelle didn't know Amanda had arrived. Isolation was deliberate. Castro understood that unity meant strength. Separation meant control. If they didn't know about each other, they couldn't plan together. They couldn't resist together. They couldn't hope together. Amanda was imprisoned in a small, dark room on the 2nd floor. Windows boarded up, door locked from the outside. A bucket for a bathroom. Minimal food. No contact with the outside world. Castro controlled everything. What she ate, when she slept, when she saw daylight, whether she lived or died. Amanda learned quickly that survival meant compliance. Resistance brought punishment. Punishment meant pain, starvation, or worse. So she complied, not because she gave up, but because she was waiting. Waiting for an opportunity. Waiting for a moment to escape. Years passed. The searches continued outside, but leads dried up. Police investigated numerous tips. None led to Amanda. Then in 2006, something changed. Amanda gave birth to a daughter, inside that house, with no hospital, no doctors, no medical care. Castro was the father. The pregnancy was the result of repeated rape. The delivery was dangerous, frightening, and nearly fatal. Michelle Knight, who had been moved to help, was forced to assist in the birth. Castro threatened to kill Michelle if the baby didn't survive. It was Michelle's first time even knowing another woman was in the house. Somehow, through sheer will and desperation, both Amanda and the child lived. That little girl became both leverage and hope. Castro used her to control Amanda. If Amanda resisted, he threatened the child. If Amanda tried to escape, he said the child would suffer. But Amanda also used her daughter as a reason to survive. She had to protect her. She had to live for her. She had to find a way out, not just for herself, but for this innocent life that depended on her. Meanwhile, outside those walls, Luana Miller continued searching. She appeared on the Montel Williams show in 2004. A psychic on the show told her, on national television, that Amanda was dead, that she was in water, that she wasn't coming home. Luana refused to believe it. She walked off the set in tears, but she didn't give up. She kept searching. She kept hoping. She kept believing her daughter was alive. But hope has a cost. The years of searching, the sleepless nights, the constant heartbreak, it took a toll. In March 2006, Luana Miller suffered a heart attack. She was only 44 years old. She died in the hospital. She never knew her daughter was alive. She never knew she had a granddaughter. She died waiting for answers that were just blocks away. Amanda learned of her mother's death from a television news broadcast that Castro allowed her to watch. It was one of the cruelest moments in a decade of cruelty. Amanda's mother had died believing her daughter might be dead, and Amanda couldn't tell her she was alive. She couldn't say goodbye. She couldn't tell her mother she loved her. That grief, that unbearable loss, stayed with Amanda for the rest of her captivity. But it also strengthened her resolve. She would survive. She would escape. She would make sure her mother's search wasn't in vain. Chapter 4. Gina DeJesus, April 2nd, 2004. Gina DeJesus was 14 years old. It was April 2nd, 2004. She was an 8th grader at Wilbur Wright Middle School in Cleveland. She was bright, energetic, loved by her family and friends. That afternoon, she was walking home from school with her friend, Arlene Castro, Ariel Castro's daughter. The two girls were close. They walked together often. At West 105th Street and Lorraine Avenue, Arlene's mother picked her up. Gina continued walking alone. She called her mother from a payphone at the corner, just a few blocks from home. She said she'd be there soon. She was last seen at that payphone, and then she was gone. Her family reported her missing immediately. The response was swift. Gina was a child. She had no history of running away. She had a stable, loving home. This was an abduction. The FBI joined the investigation. The media covered the story extensively. Gina's mother, Nancy Ruiz, became one of the most visible advocates for missing children in Cleveland. She organized vigils, held press conferences, distributed flyers. She refused to let her daughter's case fade from public consciousness. She partnered with Luana Miller, Amanda Berry's mother. The two families supported each other. They held joint press conferences. They kept both cases in the spotlight. They refused to let their daughters be forgotten. After Luana died, Nancy continued the fight alone. She established the Gina DeJesus Foundation. She worked with other families of missing persons. She became a voice for the voiceless, all while her daughter was less than 3 miles from home. The FBI investigated hundreds of leads. They interviewed suspects. They searched properties. They pursued every possible angle. But they never found Gina, because Gina was inside the house on Seymour Avenue, in the same house where Michelle Knight had been held for nearly 2 years. In the same house where Amanda Berry was raising a child in captivity. Now there were three women, 3 separate rooms, 3 separate hells. Castro kept them isolated from each other. For years they didn't know the others existed. He told each of them that the others were dead. He told Gina that her family had stopped looking. He told her that no one cared anymore. He told her she was forgotten. He showed her news reports where the coverage had slowed. He showed her the passage of time. He convinced her that escape was impossible, that even if she got out, no one would believe her, no one would help her. And isolated, terrified, and alone, Gina had little reason to doubt him. Outside, her family never stopped. Her mother attended every vigil. Her father, Felix DeJesus, became close friends with Ariel Castro. The two men bonded over their shared experience. Castro had a daughter Gina's age. He seemed to understand the pain. He offered support. He helped search for Gina. He attended the vigils Nancy organized. He expressed sympathy and solidarity, all while holding Gina prisoner in his home. The audacity of it is almost incomprehensible. The cruelty of it defies understanding. But that was Ariel Castro, a predator who wore the mask of a concerned neighbor, a monster who smiled while hiding his crimes. Chapter 5. Years of Silence. From 2004 to 2013, 3 women lived in captivity, more than 3,600 days, blocks away from their families, in a neighborhood where people walked dogs, mowed lawns, went to work every day. Children played on the street where they were held. Neighbors had barbecues in yards adjacent to the house. Life continued normal and mundane, while 3 women suffered in silence. During those years, there were warning signs, red flags that should have triggered investigations, opportunities that were missed. Ariel Castro had a history of violence. In the 1990s, he was investigated for repeated domestic violence against Grimilda Figueroa, the mother of his 4 children. She accused him of brutal, sustained abuse, breaking her nose, dislocating her shoulder, threatening to kill her. She filed charges, but Castro was never fully prosecuted. The case was complicated, the evidence was difficult, and charges were eventually dropped. Castro walked free, and the pattern of violence continued. In 1993, Grimilda filed for custody of their children, citing Castro's abuse. She was eventually granted full custody. Castro was considered dangerous by those who knew him well. But to the outside world, he remained employable, trustworthy, normal. In 2004, Castro was working as a school bus driver. A child was left on his bus for hours after a route. The child was traumatized. Castro was reprimanded and temporarily suspended. But he was not fired. He returned to work. He continued transporting children. Parents continued trusting him. The system continued employing him. Neighbors reported disturbing activity at 2207 Seymour Avenue multiple times over the years. Strange noises in the middle of the night, screaming that didn't sound right. In 2008, a neighbor saw a naked woman crawling on all fours in Castro's backyard. She looked distressed, desperate. The neighbor called the police. Officers responded. They knocked on Castro's door. Castro answered calm and friendly as always. He said everything was fine. No, there was no woman. Maybe they saw a dog. Maybe they were mistaken. The officers didn't press further. They didn't search the property. They didn't investigate. They left. The naked woman in the yard was likely one of the captives attempting a desperate escape or being punished in a way Castro thought no one would see. But even when someone did see, nothing happened. There were other calls too, reports of suspicious activity, concerns from neighbors. Each time, police responded. Each time, Castro explained it away. Each time, the officers left without searching the house. Castro was skilled at manipulation. He knew how to present himself. He knew what to say. He was polite, cooperative, never aggressive. He didn't fit the profile of a dangerous criminal. And so the police believed him. Castro continued living his double life. By day, he was a bus driver, a musician, a neighbor. He played bass at local events. He attended community gatherings. He helped search for Gina DeJesus, the girl he was holding captive. He comforted her family while keeping her imprisoned. He expressed outrage at the idea that someone could kidnap a child. He called it disgusting, unforgivable. And then he went home to 2207 Seymour Avenue, where 3 women were locked in separate rooms, where their lives were entirely in his control, where they had been for years. The house was never searched, not once, despite the reports, despite the history, despite the opportunities. The Cleveland Police Department later acknowledged they had received multiple reports about the property. They acknowledged that proper follow-up might have led to the women sooner. They acknowledged failures in communication, in record-keeping, in procedure. But acknowledgement doesn't change the past. It doesn't give back the years. It doesn't undo the suffering. Justice was present. It had the address. It had the reports. It had the opportunities. It just wasn't effective. And 3 women remained invisible, forgotten by a system that should have protected them. Chapter 6: Psychological Imprisonment. The women were not just physically restrained. They were psychologically controlled. Castro was a predator who understood that the strongest chains are not made of metal. They're made of fear, manipulation, and hopelessness. Castro used every tool at his disposal to break these women down. He chained them in the basement initially, in cold, dark, isolated spaces where they couldn't see daylight or know what time it was. Later, he moved them to separate locked rooms on the 2nd floor. Each room was fortified, doors locked from the outside with multiple locks, windows boarded up or covered so no one could see in or out, heavy curtains to block any light. The rooms were small, suffocating. He controlled their food, sometimes feeding them once every few days, just enough to keep them alive, but too little to give them strength. Starvation was a weapon. It weakened them physically. It made resistance impossible. It kept them dependent on him for survival. He controlled their clothing, often keeping them naked or in minimal clothing. This served multiple purposes: humiliation, vulnerability, and preventing escape. He controlled their hygiene, denying them showers, toothbrushes, basic dignity. He controlled their access to light, sometimes keeping them in complete darkness for days. Sensory deprivation is a form of torture. It breaks down mental resilience. It makes time meaningless. It destroys hope. But Castro went further. He forced them to play Russian roulette with a gun. He would put a single bullet in the chamber, spin it, and pull the trigger while the gun was pointed at one of them. Sometimes it clicked empty. Sometimes it didn't. The psychological terror of that game is unimaginable. He impregnated Michelle Knight at least 5 times. Each time he beat her until she miscarried. Deliberately, violently. He didn't want her to have children. He wanted to erase that possibility from her life entirely. The physical pain was excruciating. The emotional devastation was worse. Michelle wanted to be a mother. She'd lost custody of her son. And now, even the possibility of motherhood was being taken from her through violence. Castro told them their families had given up on them. He showed them old news reports where coverage had slowed. He told them the world had moved on. He told them no one remembered them anymore. He told them they would die in that house, that no one was coming, that even if they escaped, no one would believe them. He convinced them that he was all they had. For years, isolated and terrified, they had no evidence to contradict him. They didn't know the others were there. They didn't know their families were still searching. They didn't know vigils were being held. They didn't know people still cared. They were living in a carefully constructed reality designed to destroy their will to resist. And yet they resisted, not always visibly, not always in ways Castro could see. But internally, spiritually, they held on. Michelle wrote notes and hid them in the walls. Messages to herself, reminders that she was still alive, that she was still human, that she mattered. Amanda kept track of time by counting days on a calendar in her mind. She marked her daughter's birthdays. She remembered holidays. She refused to let time become meaningless. Gina held on to memories of her family, her mother's face, her father's voice, her brothers and sisters. She replayed them like movies in her mind, keeping them alive. They survived not because the captivity was bearable. It wasn't. They survived because they made a choice, every single day, for over a decade, to keep living, to keep hoping, to keep believing that somehow, someday, they would be free. They survived because they were stronger than the man who held them, stronger than the chains, stronger than the fear. They survived because they refused to let him win. Chapter 7, The Escape, May 6, 2013. May 6, 2013, a Monday afternoon, the kind of spring day where the weather is warm, people are outside, and life feels routine. On Seymour Avenue, it was a normal day, until it wasn't. Ariel Castro had left the house around 1 p.m. He had an errand to run, something mundane and forgettable. He left the women locked in their rooms, as he always did. But this time he made a mistake. He didn't lock the big inside door that separated Amanda's room from the rest of the house. It was a small oversight, a moment of carelessness after more than a decade of careful control. But it was enough. Amanda heard him leave. She heard the front door close. She heard his car pull away. She waited a moment, listening, making sure he was really gone. And then she saw it, the door to her room, unlocked. She'd tried that door 1,000 times before. Always locked, always unyielding, but now it was open. This was the moment. She grabbed her 6-year-old daughter, Jocelyn. She told her to stay quiet. They moved quickly through the house toward the front door. The front door was locked from the outside with a heavy deadbolt and additional security. But there was a storm door and outer door that could be pushed. Amanda started kicking it, screaming, pushing with everything she had. "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry, help me!" Her voice carried through the neighborhood. A neighbor, Charles Ramsey, was eating McDonald's in his house nearby. He heard the screaming. He ran outside. He saw Amanda through the small opening at the bottom of the door, trying desperately to push through. He ran over. "Help me! I've been kidnapped! I've been in this house for years!" Ramsey didn't hesitate. He helped her pull and kick at the door. The bottom portion gave way just enough. Amanda and her daughter squeezed through the opening. They were out. For the first time in nearly 10 years, Amanda Berry was outside. She ran to a nearby house. Another neighbor, Angel Cordero, let her inside. She grabbed his phone. She called 911. The call is one of the most famous emergency calls in American history. "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry. Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?" "I need police." "Okay, and what's going on there?" "I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here, I'm free now." There's a pause. The dispatcher is processing what she's hearing. "You're Amanda Berry?" "Yes." The dispatcher's voice changes. "This isn't a standard call anymore. This is history." Amanda gives the address. She tells them she's Amanda Berry. She tells them her kidnapper is Ariel Castro. She tells them there are other girls in the house. Police arrived within minutes. Multiple units. Officers running toward the house. They entered 2207 Seymour Avenue with weapons drawn. And inside, they found Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus. Alive, Michelle was in a small room on the second floor. She heard the commotion. She heard voices. Police voices. She thought it might be another trick. But when the door opened and officers came in, she knew it was real. "Are you Michelle Knight?" She could barely speak. She nodded. "You're safe now." Safe. A word she hadn't heard in 11 years. Gina was found in another room. Officers asked her name. Gina DeJesus. After 9 years, the 3 women were taken outside. Paramedics checked them immediately. They were malnourished, traumatized, physically damaged. But they were alive. The house was a horror to document. Chains hanging from walls, multiple locks on doors, boarded windows, evidence of prolonged captivity, handwritten notes hidden in crevices, makeshift restraints. It was a crime scene that told a story of unimaginable suffering. Ariel Castro was arrested hours later. He'd returned to the area, unaware that everything had changed. Police took him into custody without incident. He didn't resist. He didn't deny anything. He just asked what would happen to him. The case that had haunted Cleveland for more than a decade was finally over. The women were free. But freedom doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the trauma. It doesn't give back the years. It just means survival. And survival, as the women would learn, is only the beginning. Chapter 8. Arrest, Trial, and Sentence. Ariel Castro was charged with 937 criminal counts. The number is staggering. Each count represented an individual act of violence, rape, kidnapping, or abuse over the course of more than a decade. The charges included kidnapping, 3 counts, 1 for each woman. Rape, hundreds of counts, each one a separate assault. Aggravated murder related to the forced termination of Michelle Knight's pregnancies. Under Ohio law, causing the death of an unborn child during the commission of a felony is classified as aggravated murder. Castro faced the death penalty for those charges alone. There were also charges of assault, felonious assault, gross sexual imposition, and more. The legal document detailing the charges was hundreds of pages long. It painted a picture of systematic, sustained, deliberate abuse. Initially, Castro pleaded not guilty. His defense attorneys attempted to build a case. They claimed the women were there willingly, that the relationships were consensual, that Castro was not a monster, just a man with a sex addiction. The claims were absurd. The evidence against Castro was overwhelming. The women's testimonies, the physical evidence from the house, DNA evidence, medical records showing the extent of the injuries and malnutrition. Faced with the reality that a trial would result in a certain conviction and a likely death sentence, Castro's attorneys negotiated a plea deal. On August 1st, 2013, Castro changed his plea to guilty on all counts. In exchange for the guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Castro was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 1,000 years. The sentence was symbolic. It represented the magnitude of his crimes. It ensured he would never walk free. The sentencing hearing was emotional and powerful. Michelle Knight chose to attend. She had written a statement. She wanted to face him. She stood in front of the courtroom and addressed Castro directly. Her voice was strong, clear, unbroken. "You took 11 years of my life away," she said. "I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning." She spoke about the abuse, the miscarriages, the starvation, the isolation. She spoke about surviving when he wanted her to die. And then she said something that shocked many people in the courtroom. "I forgive you," she told him, "not for his sake, but for hers." She explained that forgiveness was the only way she could truly be free. That carrying hatred would mean he still had power over her, and she was done giving him power. "You will face hell for eternity," she said. "I will live on. You will die a little every day." She turned away from him and walked out of the courtroom. Gina DeJesus and Amanda Berry did not attend the sentencing. They chose to stay away. They sent statements that were read by the prosecutor. They expressed relief that Castro would never hurt anyone again. But they didn't want to see him. They didn't want to give him any more of their time. Castro was given an opportunity to speak. He made a rambling, incoherent statement. He claimed he was not a monster. He said he was sick, that he was abused as a child, that he was addicted to sex and pornography. He claimed the women were treated well. He claimed he never beat them. He tried to justify, to minimize, to deflect. The judge, Michael Russo, cut him off. "You have extreme narcissism," Judge Russo said. "You are a very sick person, but you are not a victim. These women are the victims." He emphasized that Castro had shown no genuine remorse, only self-pity. He said the sentence was intended to ensure Castro would never harm another person. Castro was led out of the courtroom. He would spend the rest of his life in protective custody at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. But his time in prison would be short. On September 3, 2013, exactly 1 month after his sentencing, Ariel Castro was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself using a bedsheet. Prison officials said he was checked multiple times during the evening, but managed to complete the act between checks. The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction launched an investigation. They concluded it was suicide. Castro had left no note, no explanation. His death meant no appeals, no further legal proceedings, no possibility of him ever speaking again about what happened in that house. For some, his death was a relief. It meant the women would never have to face him in court again. It meant he could never seek to reduce his sentence or claim injustice. For others, it felt like he'd escaped justice, that he'd taken the easy way out, that he'd avoided decades of imprisonment he deserved. The women themselves had mixed feelings. Michelle Knight later said she felt nothing when she heard he was dead. No joy, no sadness, just nothing. He was gone, and that meant he could never hurt anyone again. That was enough. Chapter 9, Aftermath and Reflection. The 3 women survived. But survival is not the same as recovery. In the days and weeks after their rescue, the world wanted to hear from them. Media trucks lined the streets. Reporters sought interviews. Everyone wanted to know their story. But the women needed time. They needed space. They needed to process what had happened to them. Michelle Knight was the first to speak publicly. She legally changed her name to Lily Rose Lee. She wanted a fresh start, a new identity separate from the girl who was taken. In 2014, she published a memoir titled Finding Me, A Decade of Darkness, A Life Reclaimed. The book detailed her captivity, her survival, and her journey toward healing. She became an advocate for missing persons and victims of abuse. She spoke at events, shared her story, and worked to help others who had experienced similar trauma. In interviews, she spoke candidly about the difficulty of recovery. "I forgive myself for surviving," she said in one interview. That statement encapsulates the complicated guilt many survivors feel. The guilt of living when others might not have. The guilt of surviving when so much was lost. The guilt of moving forward when the past still haunts you. Michelle worked through that guilt publicly, helping others understand that survival is not something to apologize for. Amanda Berry chose a more private path. In 2015, she co-authored a book with Gina DeJesus titled Hope, a Memoir of Survival in Cleveland. The book told both women's stories, their experiences in captivity, and their journey to freedom. Amanda became involved in advocacy work, particularly focused on missing persons. She now works with missing persons cases, using her experience to help families navigate the pain of not knowing. She raises her daughter Jocelyn away from the public eye, giving her as normal a childhood as possible. Amanda rarely gives interviews. She's protective of her privacy and her daughter's privacy. She's made peace with what happened, but she doesn't want it to define her entire life. Gina DeJesus also co-authored the memoir with Amanda. She works closely with her mother, Nancy Ruiz, on the Cleveland Missing Persons Project. The organization helps families of the disappeared, providing support, resources, and advocacy. Gina's family had spent 9 years searching for her. They understand the desperation, the hope, the pain of not knowing. Now they use that experience to help others. Gina has spoken at events and fundraisers, but like Amanda, she keeps much of her life private. She's focused on healing, on family, and on helping others. All three women have worked hard to rebuild their lives. They've attended therapy, they've reconnected with family and friends. They've pursued education, careers, and personal goals. But the scars remain. Physical scars from the abuse, emotional scars from the trauma, psychological scars that will likely never fully heal. They've spoken about nightmares, about anxiety, about the difficulty of trusting people. They've spoken about the challenge of being in crowded spaces, of feeling trapped, of sudden panic attacks. Trauma doesn't just disappear when you're free. It lingers. It changes you. It becomes part of who you are. But they've also spoken about strength, resilience, and hope. They've spoken about finding joy in small moments. They've spoken about the power of choosing to live, even when living is hard. They've rebuilt their lives, not by forgetting what happened, but by refusing to let it be the only thing that defines them. The Cleveland kidnappings forced a reckoning. How did this happen for so long? How did three women disappear from the streets and remain captive for over a decade in a house that police had visited multiple times? The Cleveland Police Department conducted an internal investigation. They reviewed every report, every call, every interaction with 2207 Seymour Avenue. They found failures at multiple levels. In 2008, when a neighbor reported seeing a naked woman in Castro's backyard, the responding officers did not file a proper report. They did not follow up. They did not request permission to search the property. They accepted Castro's explanation and left. In 2009, another neighbor reported suspicious activity. The same result. In 2011, another call. Again, no search. The department acknowledged that communication between shifts and units was inadequate. Reports were not being cross-referenced. Patterns were not being identified. There was no system in place to flag a property that had received multiple complaints. The investigation also revealed that Castro's history of domestic violence had not been adequately considered. His ex-partner had accused him of brutal abuse. She had filed for custody and protection, but that information was not readily accessible to officers responding to calls about his property. The system failed to connect the dots, and that failure cost three women more than a decade of their lives. The Cleveland Police Department implemented reforms. They improved their record-keeping systems. They established better communication protocols. They trained officers to take reports of suspicious activity more seriously. But reforms don't undo the past. They don't give back what was lost. In 2015, the city of Cleveland reached a settlement with Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight. The terms were not disclosed, but it was widely reported to be a substantial amount. The settlement was not an admission of guilt, but it was an acknowledgement that the system had failed them. The state of Ohio also provided the women with financial compensation through the Ohio Victim of Crime Compensation Program. Money cannot repair what was broken, but it provided resources for therapy, for education, for rebuilding their lives. The case also prompted broader conversations about how missing persons cases are handled, about which cases receive attention and resources, about which victims are prioritized. Michelle Knight's case received far less attention than Amanda Berry's or Gina DeJesus's. She was older. She had a troubled background. She fit a profile that law enforcement often dismisses, and that bias nearly cost her everything. The case highlighted the need for equal attention and resources for all missing persons, regardless of age, background, or circumstances. Every missing person matters. Every case deserves investigation. Every life has value. The house. 2207 Seymour Avenue became infamous. People drove past to see it. Some left flowers, notes, and tributes. Others simply stared, trying to comprehend how such horror existed behind such an ordinary facade. The city of Cleveland decided the house had to come down. It was a crime scene. It was a reminder of trauma. It was a symbol of failure. On August 7th, 2013, less than 3 months after the women escaped, demolition began. Crews tore down the house piece by piece. Michelle Knight, was given the honor of taking the first swing with a sledgehammer. She hit the porch railing, symbolically destroying the place that had held her captive. The demolition took only a few hours. By the end of the day, the house was rubble. By the next day, the rubble was gone. The lot was cleared, graded, and seeded with grass. Now there's nothing there, just an empty lot on a quiet street. Some people suggested building a memorial garden, a place for reflection, for remembrance, for honoring the women who survived. But the women themselves didn't want it. They didn't want a monument to their suffering. They didn't want people gathering at the site of their trauma. They wanted the house gone. They wanted to move forward. They wanted the world to remember them not as victims, but as survivors. And so the lot remains empty, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful memorial is absence. The space where something terrible once stood, now reclaimed by grass and sky. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse or needs help, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or visit thehotline.org. For missing persons resources, visit the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at missingkids.org. If you have information about a missing person, contact your local police department or the FBI. This documentary script is dedicated to Michelle Knight, Lily Rose Lee, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus, 3 women who survived the unimaginable and chose to live, and to Luana Miller, who never stopped searching.